Tonight, the dismal truth about mental health care, a special investigation. We find more than half of trusts in England have cut the number of crisis beds, and how young patients are being shunted hundreds of miles from their parents to get treatment.
We're one of many. You know, what you're getting a slight insight into, this is happening all over the country with hundreds of families, and that's the real tragedy.
Also tonight, rising household debt, a new warning from the Bank of England.
The first case of Zika virus sexually transmitted here in the UK.
And 20 years after that miss, Southgate signs a 4-year deal as England manager.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mark Austin and Ranveer Singh.
Good evening. We start tonight with more damning evidence of the depth of the crisis facing mental health care in England. ITV News has found that more than half of all NHS mental health trusts say they've cut the number of desperately needed beds and they're being lost at a quicker rate than ever before.
The cuts mean that many vulnerable patients are being sent hundreds of miles away from their homes and families for care. As our health editor Rachel Younger reports, this is despite repeated claims from the government that it is increasing funding.
I believe we can lead a revolution in mental health treatment in Britain.
We've increased by 5 times the number of people getting treatment for depression and anxiety.
A record level of investment in mental health.
They're promises that have come thick and fast. What's slower is any sign of the money getting through. When Ollie, who's bipolar, found himself in crisis, there was no bed available, so he was left overnight in a police cell.
The fear that I felt was just unbearable, so I just started punching the wall and I split all my knuckles and I was literally writing help in blood because no one would come and help me. So I just ended up sitting in the corner just rocking, and then I kept buzzing the bell to get them to come and talk to me, and I kept buzzing and buzzing and buzzing and buzzing and no one came.
We got in touch with all 58 mental health trusts in England. 32 replied. Of those, 60% said they'd cut the number of beds. In Bradford, 12 beds were lost this year, and one patient sent over 200 miles to get treatment when beds were full. In North London, 21 beds went at Barnet. One patient sent 233 miles away for treatment. And at Cambridge and Peterborough, 13 beds were cut, with 177 miles the longest distance a patient travelled for a bed. The promise made by David Cameron and the Health Secretary to eradicate such journeys within 5 years now looks ambitious. Nick Clegg, who pushed hard for mental health to be put on the same footing as physical conditions, believes the vulnerable are being betrayed.
Well, I haven't, as it happens, spoken out much before because I kind of accept you can't turn around a great tanker quickly. I know that as much as anybody else. But we're now a year and a half into a new government since the last general election, and not only is no progress being made, we're actually going backwards.
Hospitals are having to deal with all but impossible choices. With the NHS struggling to reduce its spiralling deficit, it's estimated 4 out of 10 mental health trusts had their budgets cut last year.
We all know actually that the NHS is in there's a series of fires going on elsewhere, and sometimes if you don't have a ring-fenced pot of money, it's pretty easy and tempting to use that money as a means to dampen the fire over there. But actually that shouldn't be the case.
The government's admitted emergency mental health care is inadequate and has a 5-year plan to put it right. But that's time those in need of help now simply don't have. Rachel Younger, ITV News.
Now, I have to admit here, this is an issue close to my own heart. Recently, I've been speaking about the struggle to get proper care for my daughter, who is desperately ill with anorexia and depression. It prompted a huge response, with many people telling me their own shocking stories. The response to my own family's experience has shown just how desperate things are out there. So many of you getting in touch to share your own, often much worse problems when it comes to getting real help. It just seems so bleak. Helen Beck told me, we've been through the same battle. The NHS have neither the time nor the resources to deal with it. Steph agrees. She says the lack of mental health services is frightening. She's found support and guidance to be non-existent. Claire said my story echoed her own. She found inadequate or no provision and little understanding. She calls it a crisis, but without crisis care.
She was so happy there, wasn't she?
It's something all too familiar for Stephen and Julia Hollings. They have to travel 400 miles from home to see their daughter, who is being treated in a special eating disorder unit in Glasgow.
From the moment she's first admitted, and she's in there for about a month, we're looking every day, and the hospital is looking every day for a bed in an eating disorder unit. Anywhere in England or Wales, no beds, and it kept on coming out. And then eventually this one came as a potential to be available in Scotland. We would take anything, anywhere, because you do. And we were delighted. That's ironic, 400 miles away. We were delighted.
And then when you leave, it's quite a wrench. It's a wrench for us, and I think it's a very much a wrench for her, because she feels that we're leaving her again. I don't think we've ever managed to do the separation without a few tears and things like that from all of us, because it is, you know, it's going to be at least another 2 weeks before you see her again.
But as I said, you know, right from the beginning, we're one of many. You know, what you're getting a slight insight into, this is happening all over the country with hundreds of families, and that's the real tragedy.
Stephen and Julia Hollings sharing their experiences of getting treatment for their daughter, and our health editor Rachel Younger joins me now. Rachel, it seems to me we're witnessing a real crisis here, particularly in teenage mental health care. What are the chances, do you think, of things improving?
I think a crisis is absolutely right, given the experiences we hear of again and again. There have been some steps in the right direction. For example, the introduction of waiting time targets over the past year. But to give you an idea of just how much of a mountain there is to climb, back in February, the average waiting time for a child seeking acute mental health care was 32 weeks, set against a target of just a fortnight. And as we have seen from our investigation, as we've heard from families like the Hollingses, from the experience you've been through, people are still having to travel enormous distances. Now, when we put our investigation to the NHS England, they pointed us to a survey that was carried out by the Royal College of Psychiatrists, a study that said that, in fact, there wasn't necessarily a need for more national mental health beds. What was needed is more community care close to home. Now, that's all well and good, and indeed the government said that next year it will put £400 million into acute community care crisis teams. The problem is, it's blatantly clear from the statistics we've had back that hospitals are cutting beds now before those teams are in place. When you combine that with the fact that most preventative mental health care is provided for by local authorities, which, unlike the NHS, have seen their budgets cut and cut again, you can see why getting help remains as tough as ever.
Tough as ever, you're quite right. And you can read more about mental health, including Rachel's blog. That's all on our website.
The Governor of the Bank of England has warned that growing levels of household debt are a threat to the economy. Mark Carney said people are borrowing more for the first time since the financial crisis of 2007. Well, our business editor Joel Hills is in the city for us tonight. And Joel, so the bank is retaining this cap on mortgage lending. Is that a sign that they're afraid that we are all becoming overstretched?
Well, look, that is the clear risk that's highlighted, or one of them anyway, in the Bank of England's latest assessment of the dangers that may lie ahead. Now, until now, the Bank of England has taken the view that the growth that we've experienced has been pretty healthy, in the sense it's not been fueled by debt, but there are signs that that is perhaps beginning to change. This is the key number from the report. It is that household debt in Britain stands at 133% of income. Put another way, the average household owes far more than it earns. Now, that number is lower than it was just before the financial crisis, but it has started growing again. And as Mark Carney pointed out today, we live in incredibly uncertain times, post-Brexit referendum. There's every reason for people to be cautious, and yet credit card debt in particular is rising.
With no apparent change to their job security, and with credit available and cheap, consumers are drawing down their savings and borrowing for the first time since the crisis. These developments reinforce existing vulnerabilities from high and rising UK household indebtedness.
And Joel, then more bad news for consumers today, that they could be now hit by a rise in prices at the pump.
Yes, this is all to do with OPEC. There are 14 countries in the world that control about 1/3 of total oil output. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran among them. They are OPEC, a cartel that has struggled in recent years to speak as one. Today, it found its voice, and collectively they decided they are going to reduce oil output. Now, this should have an impact on the oil price. In a sense, it's not a surprise. The price of oil is about half where it was just 2 years ago, but it rose very sharply today. And when the price of oil rises, the price of more or less everything rises. The Bank of England, it's early days, but the bank will keep a close eye on this, a very close eye indeed. And the only place in Britain where this will be seen as good news is in Aberdeen, where the North Sea has taken a hell of a pounding in the last 2 years.
Yeah, indeed. Joel Hill's in the city tonight. Thank you.
Health officials have reported the first UK case of the Zika virus being sexually transmitted. Public Health England says a woman was infected by her partner who had recently travelled to an area with Zika. Our science correspondent Alok Jha is here. What else are officials saying, Alok?
Well, we know that the woman's made a full recovery. She was infected by her partner who had travelled somewhere where there was Zika. It's normally a very mild infection in adults, and the warnings have always been for women who are pregnant or want to get pregnant because it affects the brains of developing babies. It's mostly spread by mosquitoes, but Zika has been shown to linger in bodily fluids like semen for many, many months, and only 60 cases around the world have been shown to be spread in this way, in this sexual way. And so the UK case wasn't unexpected, but you've got to say it's very, very rare. There have been only 265 cases of Zika in this country. So Public Health England are now saying that just as the warnings to women before to say, you know, don't go to Zika-hit countries if you're thinking about getting pregnant, to same to men, if you want to have a baby, don't do it. Or if you have been to one of those countries, use safe sex for at least 6 months after you get back.
Right, Alok, thank you very much indeed.
The UN's humanitarian chief tonight called for world powers to protect civilians in the besieged city of Aleppo before it becomes a giant graveyard. 20,000 people have fled the city in recent days as pro-government forces make a series of sweeping gains. And as the rebels vow to fight on, tens of thousands of civilians are still trapped inside. Paul Davies has the latest on Aleppo under siege.
After months of stalemate, the Syrian army is closing in. With superior firepower, blasting its way into battered suburbs of East Aleppo that until days ago were held by rebel fighters. To avoid being caught in the crossfire of a deadly last stand, an estimated 20,000 civilians have left their homes. They are desperately searching for somewhere safe. But all routes, it seems, lead to danger and death. There are claims that refugee families like these trying to escape the fighting have been targeted by Syrian artillery. ITV News has seen images of mass casualties that are too graphic to broadcast. Aleppo's city leader, Britta Hassan, was in Paris today, appealing to the world to let the civilians get out of his city. While there is no safe passage, the International Red Cross and Red Crescent is at least trying to provide shelter and food for thousands of displaced families. Here, disused factories have been converted to temporary homes for 8,000 civilians. Another site is being prepared for the thousands more who are heading this way. Russian troops who've been fighting alongside President Assad's government army have been playing the role of liberators and benefactors, distributing food and blankets as they move into eastern Aleppo. But the desperate desire to get away suggests these people remain deeply suspicious of a force that's been shelling and bombing them for so many months. Paul Davis, ITV News.
A third of all police forces in the UK are now investigating allegations of sexual abuse in football. It's emerged today. It comes as more former footballers waive their anonymity to speak for the first time about their dreadful experiences. Our sports editor, Steve Scott, is here. So, Steve, what's the latest victim saying?
Yes, every day, Mark, we're hearing more harrowing testimonies from former footballers about what they went through. The latest player to speak out is Derek Bell, former Newcastle United player. He says he was abused by his coach between the ages of 12 and 16. Today, he urged others, whoever they are, to come forward and speak out just like he has.
They are in the limelight, but there's a darker side that happened in the past. And if I can raise awareness with the PFA, with the FA and with the NSPCC, please come forward and don't live in silence and don't live through the suffering that I've suffered.
Now, another significant development today, Mark, follows on from claims that Chelsea paid hush money to a former youth player of theirs who said he was abused by a Chelsea employee in the 1970s. Chelsea have not denied, by the way, that this payment took place, and that's led to the Conservative MP Damien Collins suggesting that all clubs should come forward if they have a contract like this in place, admit it, rip it up. They want it monitored by the FA, and they also want the FA, if they don't do that, to impose very strict sanctions on them.
All right, Steve, thank you very much indeed for that. And former world darts champion Eric Bristow has today apologised for claiming victims of football sex abuse are, in his words, not proper men. Bristow said his posts on social media yesterday used the wrong words, and he accepted he had offended many people. He insists any money he's been paid to talk about his mistake will now be donated to charity.
Donald Trump has announced he'll step away from what he called his great businesses before he's inaugurated as president in January. Trump said his new job is far more important.
It follows growing concerns over the conflict of interests between his property empire and the White House. But as our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports, separating himself from his businesses might not be that easy.
Donald Trump continues to wine and dine potential cabinet appointees, both friends and foes being asked to pay homage at the court of the president-elect. It is not just key jobs that are being fought over. At the heart of the unease about this emerging presidency is the question of how a businessman who owns so much in so many countries can serve in the White House without major conflicts of interest. Trump has investments or owns companies in at least 20 countries. Not just his famous golf courses in Scotland and in Ireland, but multiple property and licensing deals in some of the most politically sensitive countries in the world.
Okay, hi everybody.
Within days of winning the presidency, Trump was meeting with his Indian business partners. Now he promises to separate himself from his property empire, in all likelihood handing over authority to his children. But that, according to experts in ethics and law, is a recipe for disaster.
The White House is going to be a school for scandal. But he seems to be signaling he's going to let his kids manage the business. There's going to be some kind of a less formal stepping away. That's not good enough. And it's going to land us into this quagmire from day one, from before day one. It's amazing that we're talking about it now.
Trump has just opened a new luxury hotel in Washington, just a few blocks away from the White House. Already foreign delegations are booking their rooms here, hoping to curry favor with the president-elect. But Trump has shown on so many occasions that he can defy conventional wisdom. None of these ethical issues are new, and still Americans elected him president, many declaring they relished the idea of a businessman in the White House. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
Men and boys, some as young as 11, are increasingly falling victim to online blackmail known as sextortion. The National Crime Agency says there's been a surge in such offences and 4 victims have killed themselves. Many are lured in by sophisticated techniques and then told they will be exposed unless they pay a ransom. Here to explain is Rebecca Barry.
Hey, how are you doing?
On the internet, all is not always as it seems.
You're being blackmailed.
The film will be shared with your friends, your family, unless you pay.
This is known as sextortion, a form of blackmail. Criminals use websites like Facebook or Skype to trick victims into sharing intimate images, then demand money. In the last year, 4 men are known to have killed themselves after they were targeted. We spoke to one man who was tricked on a webcam, then explicit images of him were posted online.
I was shocked. It was hurtful. It's a horrible thought, to be honest, because it's obviously a very private thing, and I'm a bit ashamed of myself for falling for such a silly trick. It's not nice knowing anyone can access a private picture of me.
The number of people reporting this type of blackmail has more than doubled, from 385 last year to 864 this year. Most victims are young men, aged 21 to 30. And for some, like 17-year-old Ronan Hughes, the trauma becomes too much. He took his own life, one of at least 4 suicides linked to this crime.
Yesterday alone we had 24 people contact us.
This website was set up to help people who've been scammed.
A lot of people will come to us months, even years later, still scared that the video is going to turn up. We get a lot of people come in to us and say, if the video ever gets leaked, I will kill myself.
And it's become a global money-making crime.
We've always dealt with blackmail and with kidnap and extortion, and they are relatively low-volume offences. And this is really the first one where you're seeing effectively a mass market offence, because they are able to target so many people.
And with many cases unreported, the real number of victims will be even higher. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
The National Lottery is urging its online customers to change their passwords after tens of thousands had personal data stolen by hackers. It's not thought any money has been taken from the accounts of the lottery itself, but there are concerns the stolen information could be sold on the black market.
The Queen's granddaughter, Zara Tindall, and her husband, Mike, have revealed that they're expecting their second child. The couple already have a 2-year-old daughter, Mia.
And finally, 20 years ago, Gareth Southgate would probably have been England fans' last choice as a future manager. His penalty miss cost the team a place in the Euro '96 final, losing to bitter rivals Germany.
Then you'll remember Southgate sort of rubbed in the salt with an infamous pizza ad. But today, his renaissance was complete, signing a 4-year deal as England boss. And his first opponents will come as no surprise, probably. Here's our sports correspondent, Ian Payne.
Gareth Southgate left the FA's headquarters in Staffordshire this afternoon with the job he's always wanted. He's been given a 4-year contract.
From my point of view, delighted to know exactly what the task is now for for the next few years. Determined to give everything I have to give the country a team that they're proud of, one that they're going to enjoy watching play, watching develop. And for me, the hard work really starts now.
Gareth Southgate spent his club years playing for Crystal Palace, Aston Villa and Middlesbrough, and appeared internationally for England 57 times. His post-playing career saw him managing Middlesbrough and the England under-21s, but he's probably most famous for this. An infamous penalty shootout miss for England against Germany in the semi-final of Euro '96 at Wembley.
Thank you, miss.
It was so infamous that he and other England penalty missers even made an advertisement about it.
Thanks a lot, boys. I feel much better now. Ooh, this time is at the post.
So it was ironic, or clever, that this company was holding a conference in England's hotel today. Well, as you can see behind me, the FA has wasted no time in telling the world that Gareth Southgate is the new permanent England manager. He'll be unveiled publicly here at Wembley tomorrow. England's next match isn't until March, and guess who it's against? Yes, Southgate's old friends, Germany. But this match will be a friendly, with no shootout needed. Ian Payne, ITV News, Wembley.
Good luck to him. Not the easiest job in the world, that.
Sense of destiny about it, isn't there?
Just ask the others. That's it. Raggy Omar is here with news at 10 tonight.
But from everyone here, do have a very good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.